Okay, my name is Kevin McCall, and I'm lead product manager of BizTalk Server. And today we're going to give you an overview of not only BizTalk Server itself, but the other investments we're making in BizTalk. This really has a number of goals. Our goals include not only, of course, giving you, a good intro to BizTalk, of course, but also to provide a stored show that can be accessed in lieu of some of the introductory sessions at MTB. At MTB, we really want to focus on some of the more advanced technologies and advanced topics. The feedback we've received from the field historically has suggested that you really want us to dig into the bits, dig into code samples, dig into example projects, etc. And so this is going to serve as kind of the BizTalk 101, if you will, so that we can get right down to business when we get to MTB. So why don't we go ahead and get started, and we'll be taking questions at the end, and I can stick around as long as you would like in order to address your questions. First of all, just to put some of this in context, BizTalk is an integration server. It's got a number of different names depending on who you ask in the industry. For example, Gartner refers to these types of products as integration brokers. Giga refers to these types of products as enterprise integration products, kind of a mouthful. But the bottom line is BizTalk is all about integration. BizTalk, as an overall initiative from Microsoft, is all about making it fundamentally easier to integrate business processes that consist of applications and services and web services, and to do so not only within but also between organizations. And this all comes together in the various investments that we're making in BizTalk. Now, obviously, integration is not a new concept. I mean, people have been integrating applications and services for years, but it's always been too damn difficult. It's not uncommon for people to spend millions and millions of dollars, sometimes tens of millions of dollars, and take years in order to integrate certain applications together within an organization. Now, the problem actually gets even more challenging when we consider that in order to be competitive today, organizations must not just integrate their internal applications and services into integrated business processes, but they must then subsequently integrate their business processes with those of their customers and their key suppliers over the internet in order to be more competitive as an entire value chain. And so integration has always been too difficult. It's always been too expensive. It's always taken too long. And so BizTalk is really where our major investments in integration come together, with the goal being to make it fundamentally easier for organizations to integrate their business processes not only within but also between organizations over the internet. So let's take a look at this integration idea and the concept of how integration has been done in the past, so we can shed a little bit of light on not only what we've learned from that, but also some of our design goals for BizTalk as an effort. So we're all familiar with using what we refer to as the distributed object method of integrating applications. Now, naturally, we use DCOM as our object standard for doing that. In the core world, you've got IIOP, and in the EJB world, they've got their standard, naturally, for connecting applications together. Now, whether or not you're using DCOM or IOP, etc., in order to connect applications together using remote object invocation, all of these methods share some limitations. It is the right tool for the right job, and so I don't want to imply as we move forward in this discussion that with BizTalk and with XML and with Internet standards that these object-based technologies go away, because they don't. It's really a right tool for the right job type of issue. But when we connect applications together using, let's say, a technology like DCOM, there are certain limitations. One is that this does represent a tightly coupled method of connecting applications together. So application A, sitting on one box, is accessing the specific interfaces of another application on a remote box. And this tight coupling really not only represents technical expense, and so whenever, for example, one application next to another using this object interface, it's a very expensive connection, lots of round trips and actual resources that are tied up on the destination computer in order to service that connection. But really more profoundly, it's very difficult to make a distributed system that has a number of these tightly coupled interconnections very highly scalable. It's also very difficult to make systems that have these types of connections very highly available. And the reasons are similar. If we have a number of these types of tight connections between applications across a distributed app, it's very difficult to scale up that application, because if application A is, making a remote request from application B over DCOM, and application application B is either very tired or maybe even that box is down, then naturally it's very difficult to scale up that system. Okay, and for the same reasons, we suffer availability limitations as well when we have these types of tightly coupled connections between applications, right? The perception might be that the application is down, when in reality it's simply waiting for a response from an application that it's connected to using DCOM across the network. And so, once again, it is the right technology in many situations, but because of these limitations, what we see these days is more loosely coupled integration techniques used much more frequently. So a more loosely coupled integration technique using a queuing technology like MSMQ, Microsoft naturally, or MQ series from IBM, allows us to overcome some of these limitations. It allows us to integrate applications together that are geographically more distributed so that I can drop a message onto a queue and let that other application pick that message up off of that queue either right away or possibly at a later time if that application is down for planned maintenance. Okay, so it does allow us to overcome some of those limitations. It also allows us to overcome some of the availability and scalability issues by creating separate cooperating applications that all can kind of process independently. It also allows the distributed system to be much more scalable and much more available overall. But, you know, this method of connecting applications together, what we kind of loosely refer to as the message broker category, which really not only includes some of these basic messaging techniques, but also, more accurately, products that are built upon this paradigm. So products like Neon, for example, or others that build upon this message queuing idea and add other various services on top of them. This generation of products comes with its own set of limitations. Number one, all these products are fairly proprietary. So, you know, MSMQ is proprietary to Microsoft, just like MQ series is proprietary to IBM. And the other products in this environment are proprietary, using a proprietary terminal representation for data, etc. All of these products, the message broker products more specifically, are very expensive to buy and even more expensive to implement and to maintain. And so when you go out and buy a number of these different types of message broker products, we'll talk about some of those specific organizations in a moment, they're still really expensive. And number three is that these technologies work really well within an organization, but they really don't do an effective job of integrating applications together across the firewall. They don't do an effective job of performing trading partner integration type of challenges, you know, that have to happen over the internet. And so, really, if we take what we've learned and we say, all right, then what types of concepts do we need to apply to this integration challenge so that we can overcome not only the limitations of the prior generations of integration technology, but also really embrace their strengths. Really, the solution has to start with using industry standard transport protocols in order to complement some of these other technologies. Industry standard protocols like HTTP and SMTP and moving forward FTP, but also, for example, HTTPS, which we'll get to in a moment, and being able to use SMIME, for example, in conjunction with MTP. So we'll talk about those in a minute. But being able to not only support these industry standard transport protocols, but also supporting the open expression of data in XML, of course. And when we combine the support of these standard transport protocols with support for open data formats, then we have a very powerful combination, a combination that allows us to overcome not only organizational boundaries, but also overcome some of the technological challenges and bridge technological boundaries. So, for example, being able to send data back and forth between systems that are based on, different operating systems, applications that are based on different programming models and written in completely different programming languages. And so we refer to this conceptual model as the web services-based approach. The ability to expose an application as a service using standard transport protocols and allowing you to access that service using open data formats, for example, using XML messages. Okay, and so we've all, of course, heard this term before, web services, and here we're really describing it in a fairly general way. So if we move forward and talk about the implications of web services allow either an application sitting on a PC, for example, or a user interactively sitting in front of a PC to access various websites either interactively or it also allows applications to access websites and utilize them as services. It also allows those websites and applications, for example, to easily subsequently access other back-end applications and websites as services. It allows you to then start tying together these services into conceptually composite applications that then can be subsequently exposed as a single service, for example. But really the point I want to draw out here is that by using these standard technologies, we can not only expose these types of services to users and to applications, but we can also conveniently expose these types of services to other types of devices as well. So that is a benefit, a byproduct of using these standard technologies and accessing these services using open data formats based in XML. And so the way we see this manifesting itself is sets of loosely coupled services that are all interconnected and accessed using XML-based messages, but also services that can be described by XML-based contracts, and of course accessible from and written in many different programming languages. So it shouldn't surprise anyone that we believe that you should be able to participate in this world no matter what your application is written in. Okay, we don't believe naturally that you should have to write your application in a given specific sacred programming language in order to be able to derive the benefits of this architecture. So let's make a segue now to BizTalk. Once again, bringing us back to center, BizTalk is all about making it fundamentally easier to integrate business processes, not only within an organization, but also between organizations over the internet. And there has been a lot of confusion historically regarding what the heck BizTalk really is. You've heard it referred to in a number of different ways. And I'll talk about those investments, and then I'll talk about BizTalk Server, which really introduces the orchestration concept and really is the tangible product that we will lead with that really brings all these capabilities together, and frankly is the thing that we will sell in the marketplace, right? Companies, you can have all the standards you want, but organizations really can't do any type of integration project without having a real product in order to do it on top of. And BizTalk Server will represent that product, the actual set of plumbing that organizations can use to connect business processes together. So let's start with BizTalk Framework. I'm going to list these in chronological order. The thing that we introduced first was over a year ago, and that was the BizTalk Framework. And this was very forward-looking. This was a set of guidelines that anyone could use for basic XML-based messaging, basic XML-based data routing exchange between applications. Okay, so it was a set of basic guidelines. You could implement it on any platform, so it wasn't specific to the Windows platform. And moving forward, BizTalk Framework is one of many, frankly, but is the default method that can be used with BizTalk Server 2000 in order to reliably exchange XML-based messages with BizTalk Server 2000. We'll talk more about that in a moment, and I can give you a pointer to reading more on that. But just keeping it at a high level for today, BizTalk Framework is an XML-based messaging framework that allows you to pass XML-based messages between applications. Now, BizTalk Framework 2.0, which we released a draft of over a month ago and which will be completed and published very, very soon, is built on top of SOAP. So it's not only compliant with SOAP 1.1, but it also supports other important technologies such as multi-part MIME and others. So this is a strong protocol, and as I mentioned, can be utilized within BizTalk Server 2000 to reliably exchange messages with other servers. So actually some of the competitors of BizTalk Server 2000 will support BizTalk Framework 2.0 as the method for interacting with BizTalk Server. Now, BizTalk.org is something else that we released last year. BizTalk.org is actually a site on the web. It's a community and a library. And it's a place where people can go and they can learn about XML, but they can also publish XML schemas and also find and reuse XML schemas that may be valuable in a solution. So, for example, you may have a customer that is going to be doing creating a resume tracking application for a customer, and that organization may want to represent a standard resume in XML. And so instead of creating their own, which is possibly incompatible with pretty much everybody else on the planet, they may choose to go to BizTalk.org, search for the word resume, and then use that schema that describes a standard resume so they can easily interoperate with sites like Monster.com and others. Okay, and actually, the schema that Monster.com uses for the standard resume is indeed published on BizTalk.org, for example. Okay. And so the third thing you may have heard of in the BizTalk universe is indeed BizTalk Server 2000. And so the framework, the BizTalk.org community and library, both work with, of course, BizTalk Server, and that's really the product that we're going to sell, that we're going to make money on. The prior two resources are resources that can be used by anyone, and BizTalk Server 2000 is an actual product that we will sell that was just released in beta last week, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. But it's also important to stress that when we consider the B2B platform, BizTalk Server is clearly a server that can be used to implement B2B relationships, but it's also valuable to point out for customers that Windows 2000 right out of the box is a good B2B server. There are a number of services built into Windows 2000 that make it the best B2B server on the market, and actually about 60% of all B2B sites that are live today are running on Windows. Now, Windows 2000, just a couple examples of those services include XML support built right into the platform. So by building XML support right into Windows 2000, any application that sits on Windows 2000 can utilize those XML-based services in order to, read and write XML, in order to validate an XML document, etc. So we support all the key important XML-based standards in the platform, not only the XML core standard, but also other technologies like, XML namespaces and the XML DOM and, and others like that. Now, BizTalk Server 2000, of course, as we mentioned, is what we refer to as the business process orchestration server, really where things come together. So just to kind of put this in context, I get asked quite frequently, is Microsoft trying to take the XML standard and make it their own? Is Microsoft trying to hijack, if the customer is a little more aggressive, they might phrase it in the context of, is Microsoft trying to hijack XML standards? And so it's useful to communicate exactly where we'll compete and what the stack looks like. If we consider the layers of a pure XML solution, it starts with the core standards. Okay, using the core standards such as XML, you can then create schemas. Schemas are XML-based grammars that describe things that are interesting to us. So maybe an XML-based grammar for describing shoes, or maybe an airplane. So Boeing might want to use XML to describe an airplane or the parts on an airplane, or a standard resume. Obviously, there are an infinite number of examples, but schemas are actual sets of defined XML tags that describe something that's interesting to us, that describe some sort of object or service in the real world. Okay? Now, using these application schemas, you can also utilize XML-based frameworks for then passing those documents based on those schemas back and forth between applications. So at the framework level, the framework needs to address issues such as, when I move documents back and forth between applications, can I send one? Can I send more than one at once? What about attachments? What about security with those documents? What about any one of a number of other characteristics that need to be addressed when we consider the actual framework, an actual method for sending documents back and forth between applications. Okay, and the documents you send back and forth between those applications are normally going to be based on some sort of specific XML-based application schema. Now, complementing these kind of core technologies, then we get to the implementation layer. And the implementation layer is where we actually see servers, actual complete platforms appear that build upon these underlying technologies. Right? The implementation is where products appear that allow us to actually do the real work. The existence of application schemas and frameworks are really used as building blocks. You still need a server in order to define the interactions between these applications, in order to implement those connections and those business processes. Okay, so, and then of course, the last layer of the stack is the actual solution, the actual application that a user will access. Right? So, if we look at this entire stack, the core standards we get from the W3C. So the W3C owns those standards. We believe that the W3C is the right place for those standards to be developed, and we participate quite extensively with the activities of the W3C. Okay, so Microsoft is not trying to create our own standard. It's important to stress that BizTalk is not a standard. BizTalk leverages existing standards. Those standards surround XML. Okay, so we have no interest in competing on that level. We participate quite actively with the W3C efforts. At the application schema level, it's important to realize that Microsoft will only really we will only participate in creating specific application schemas in specific distinct areas. So for example, publishing an XML schema for open financial exchange, for example, for interacting with a personal information, a money manager type product like MS Money, or Quicken or others like that. Okay, so we're involved with defining schemas, for example, for those types of products. And and depending on the use, we do work with other organizations to define specific schemas. But in general, most of the standard schemas that appear across the world will come out of industry standards groups like HL7 in healthcare, or ARTS, or NRF in retail, or VIX in distribution, or one of another of many other industry-specific groups that define application schemas. Many of these groups historically have defined EDI standard document formats historically, and now they're jumping on XML, and they're redefining a lot of these standard business documents using XML. So we'll see a lot of application schemas appear there, and BizTalk.org simply provides a place where people can store, access, and reuse these schemas. It's meant as a simple mechanism to promote gravitating towards standards, so that if I've got a great schema for a PC or something, then I can share it to promote cooperation, to promote standardization for specific XML schemas. Now at the framework level, BizTalk Framework does participate at that level. BizTalk Framework is based on SOAP. There are various activities within this space. So we see activity, for example, within EBXML, which they really haven't gotten that far yet, but they're working on things that are conceptually competitive with BizTalk Framework. Okay, now here we see the framework foundation indeed being SOAP moving forward, and now that the W3C has picked up SOAP and is moving forward and creating an activity based around it, that's a very credible and appropriate candidate for a standard for XML-based messaging moving forward. BizTalk Framework is based on that and adds some XML tags on top of it in order to do some more sophisticated things on top of the SOAP foundation. But the BizTalk Framework will continue to evolve, will continue to mature in that space. Naturally, at the implementation layer, we've got our platform, Windows, SQL, and of course BizTalk Server 2000. And using those real products, you can build applications and solutions. So that's really what the stack looks like. Should I pause for questions? Am I talking too fast, Craig? Okay, just want to make sure. If anybody lets us know, then I can slow down. It's not my nature, though. So anyway, let's talk about the competitive space. So this is a tough issue because I get questions around this all the time. And this is a very new and very unique space for Microsoft. This is about as enterprise of a type of product as we've ever sold before. There are a number of different products that exist in this competitive space. They can kind of generally be listed as one of three. And there is a substantial gray area here because all of these products have functionality in them that kind of that goes across all three of those groups. But let's look at this from a historical perspective. For years, EAI products have existed. Now, EAI stands for Enterprise Application Integration Products. Those products are used to connect applications together within a firewall. Okay? They normally are based on synchronous connections between applications, but normally they possess queuing mechanisms so that I can queue up the connections between applications in some sort of queue. But they're normally based on synchronous connections. Now we call this A-to-A integration. Okay, A-to-A simply resembling or simply representing application to application integration, once again within a firewall. Okay, now this problem has a certain flavor to it. As I mentioned, usually we're connecting these applications together using synchronous means. The security infrastructure is fairly predictable because, once again, it's all internal. The use of adapters is prevalent in order to connect applications together. So, for example, if I want to send data from application A to application B quite frequently, the product takes that data and uses an application-specific adapter in order to convert it into a format that's native to that destination app and then send it to that app. And so there are a number of kind of common characteristics of these types of applications. And organizations in this space include Active, BEA with their eLink product, Crossworlds, IBM with the MQ stack, not only MQ series, the foundation, but more specifically the MQ integrator product that utilizes MQ series. They've also got the MQ workflow product that can be used to define workflows, but it really kind of comes together. The most specific competitor is MQ integrator. Level 8 with their Geneva product, Neon, STC, the Sun Forte product, Tibco Active Enterprise, Vitria Businessware. All of these are EAI products. We'll come back and make a few more comments on those in a moment. The second basic category is some of the newer XML infrastructure vendors, and we refer to those as the B2B players. And they normally focus on connecting applications together across a firewall. So doing trading partner integration over the internet, for example. So organizations in this space include Bluestone, On Display, which was recently purchased by Vignette, Xtricity with their Alliance product, WebMethods with their B2B integrator product. A third category is the EDI products themselves, and we kind of jokingly refer to EDI as, B2B before B2B was B2B, because, let's face it, B2B integration has been done for years. It's been done for decades, okay, and it was called EDI. Now, EDI had its strengths and weaknesses, right? Normally, EDI integration included sending documents that were either based on or derivatives of EDI standard document formats. There were two major standards, the ANSI X12 United States Domestic Standard and the UN EDIFACT International Standard. And those documents were normally sent back and forth over value-added networks. VANs offered, for example, by AT&T or IBM, or GEIS, GE Information Services, now GXS. Okay, so people have been doing B2B integration for years, but EDI historically has really only been accessible to the larger organizations. Small and medium-sized organizations have not found EDI technology approachable because of its cost and its complexity. Okay, so companies in this space include like Harbinger, Sterling, Mercator, which is really known to be the Cadillac of mapping tools in that space, and there are others. Now, let's kind of talk about the gray areas here, though. The EDI product vendors have been adapting their products for quite some time to support internet technologies. So you, for example, can use one of these products to send EDI documents back and forth over value-added networks, but also to send EDI documents back and forth over the internet. Okay? Now, they're also adapting their products to be able to support XML as a data format. Okay, so by being able to speak Internet Standard Transport Protocols and being able to speak XML as a data format, you could call these EDI products direct competitors in the B2B integration space as well, and that would not be inappropriate. Okay, the issue is simply that these products came from an EDI background and still, therefore, really look like EDI products, right? I mean, the mappers are based around EDI standards and methods. Okay. Now, likewise, the XML infrastructure vendors, these products are focused on loosely coupled integration across the firewall. Obviously, it has to be based on loosely coupled techniques because they're going over the internet, right? So asynchronous is really the method there. Okay. But these are newer products, and oftentimes they really do a poor job of connecting applications together internally. For example, the B2B integration vendors, oftentimes the performance of these products is really awful. It doesn't address the high performance required oftentimes for internal integration, for example, for financial systems. But the bottom line is all of these are kind of all merging together. The EAI products are putting in B2B functionality. For example, BEA, E-Link, Level 8, Sun Forte, Tibco, Vitria, all of those have been implementing sophisticated functionality to B2B integration. And likewise, the B2B integration vendors are either putting in EAI functionality for integration within the firewall or simply buying EAI vendors. So for example, WebMethods bought Active, and WebMethods and Active as a combination is trying to address both of those requirements, the internal A-to-A requirements and the external B2B requirements. So we really do see a big gray area here, but kind of loosely defined, these are the three categories you can define these organizations in across the competitive space. Now, it probably won't surprise you that we're positioning BizTalk, and frankly, the design goal of BizTalk is to be able to address all three of these requirements. While BizTalk is not an EDI server, it does support EDI document formats, so we can map back and forth to EDI document formats. And by providing a mix of A-to-A and B2B integration functionality, we can provide a fairly comprehensive server at a fraction of the cost that's been required historically to approach any of these classes of products. So really, that's a competitive space. We could spend all day just on this slide, but I just wanted to give you a basic overview of the types of organizations we're going to run into in this space. And in competing against most of these, we're going to compete on the comprehensiveness of our offering. We're definitely going to compete on price, because our product is going to be much easier to use and far less expensive to buy and to implement than nearly all of these products. Okay. So we'll come back to this a little bit later, but that's kind of the general space and what it looks like. Now let's talk a little bit more specifically about what BizTalk Server is going to provide. Now we look at the whole integration solution as a stack. And so if we consider what are the pieces of the puzzle that are required in order to, once again, achieve this goal of making it fundamentally easier to integrate business processes not only within but also between organizations over the internet. Well, first of all, you need a common communication medium, right? That kind of we take for granted these days, right? But on top of that common communication medium, that common communication infrastructure, we then need a bunch of plumbing to do integration. So we need, for example, the ability to define structured document formats. We need the ability, for example, to map between different structured document formats. We need the ability to encrypt and decrypt, to be able to digitally sign, to be able to send documents either synchronously or asynchronously between applications, etc. So we need a whole bunch of plumbing to connect those apps together. And that's where really most of these products stop, is they provide a lot of integration plumbing, but they don't kind of take it to the next level. And the higher level is what we call orchestration. And so we look at this environment and we say, okay, on top of the communication infrastructure, yes, you need all the integration plumbing, but that's really not good enough. If I have to look at implementing every business process as dozens of different connections between applications, and then use this integration plumbing in order to connect all these applications together in a point-to-point manner, then I really don't have a holistic, graceful view of the overall business process. And hence, not only is it difficult to implement the business process, but it's impossible to maintain and evolve that business process over time. And that's a critical requirement, is time to market. Not only time to market for implementing these processes, but for reacting and changing these processes over time. And so how do we abstract away, you might say, access to all this integration plumbing so that a business analyst can define these business processes and then connect these systems together for the most part? And then subsequently, when the business process changes, that person can easily make the changes in the higher level environment without having to root around in the gutter at the plumbing level. Okay, so those of you that have done hardcore integration projects before, I'm sure appreciate this challenge. And so basically the stack includes, as we mentioned, starting at the communication layer, internet technologies. So this isn't going to surprise anyone, right? We kind of take this for granted these days, but the internet provides us this kind of common communication infrastructure in order to connect apps together. And even internally, we use internet technologies, right? We use TCP/IP internally in order to connect systems together. So we take that for granted. The integration layer includes a ton of integration plumbing. We've mentioned a lot of these before. All of that plumbing is provided across what we refer to as the BizTalk messaging services. So within the BizTalk Server 2000 product, there is a set of services we collectively, rather informally I guess, refer to as the BizTalk messaging services. The orchestration environment, the business environment for modeling and evolving business processes is handled within what we refer to as the BizTalk orchestration environment. And the BizTalk orchestration environment and the BizTalk messaging environment combine to provide the overall product. So BizTalk Server 2000 provides capabilities at both of those layers, you might say. And that's really what's represented by BizTalk Server. This is a competitive advantage, by the way. While a lot of our competitors provide a lot of great integration plumbing, very few of them have environments that are graceful enough to be approachable by a business analyst. Some of them don't have these environments at all. And of those of them that do, our environment, we foresee that our environment is going to be far easier to use and far more effective than those. Some of them do provide really, really simple graphical environments that allow you to, for example, define the serial tasks that would occur as part of a process of sending data from application to another. But our environment is far more sophisticated than that and allows you to implement very sophisticated, parallelism and branching logic and transaction boundaries in order to implement various steps in a business process. So, again, we could spend all day on this. I just want to cover it at a high level. But we provide both of those types of capabilities in the BizTalk Server 2000 box. So if we look at this from another perspective, what are the challenges that an organization has when they're implementing really sophisticated distributed business processes? Now, we've alluded to a few of these concepts today already, but let me kind of bring them together. Organizations, in order to define a really sophisticated distributed business process, must address four conceptually unique types of challenges. One is they've got to be able to address their A-to-A requirements. How do I connect applications together internally, right? So if we're implementing, for example, an e-procurement scenario, an MS Market type of scenario, there are various applications that need to connect to one another internally, like the MS Market app connecting to various modules within SAP. Now, you also have B2B challenges. So for example, any distributed, sophisticated business process is going to normally include interactions with outside parties. So for example, going back to MS Market, after we create an order and after the right person in the organization approves the order, we've got to send some sort of purchase order to the supplier, right? We might send it by itself, we might batch a bunch of them up and send them as a batch, but the point is we've got to send something to a business partner. And so those types of challenges are very different than the A-to-A challenges because we've got to represent information in an open format, normally based on XML. The security implications are different. It's always going to be asynchronous, etc. Now, there are other people-based processes that normally we're going to find across a distributed business process. We call those P2P processes, right? So, for example, let's go back to the MS Market example. After I buy a laptop, if it goes over a certain amount of money, then my boss has got to approve it. So, he's got to approve that purchase. Another example of a person process might include, for example, when a good is being shipped, maybe someone needs to inspect it on the warehouse dock before it's shipped because those materials are hazardous or something. These are people-based processes, right? So those need to be incorporated into the overall business process. And lastly, we simply must deal with basic process automation issues. And process automation is simply the issue of kicking off an automated process and executing the process as a series of activities, managing the state machine for that long-running process, and making sure that the right actions are taken based on exceptions to that process, etc. Okay, so a basic example of this, historically is like I believe what is it, JPL, I believe, a mainframe batch processing language. JBL. I have to try to remember the acronym. It's been too long. So anyway, the batch processing language in the IBM mainframe environment that allows you to define what steps are taken in order to process a series of batches. Okay, so not unlike that concept, only far more sophisticated. So really, we address all these different types of challenges within the BizTalk environment. So if we consider this within the context of a business process, this might be a good way to describe it to customers. If we look at a simple business process, a process that includes a customer placing an order with us and then us shipping that order to the customer. And if we look at this process end to end, it starts with a customer placing an order with us. They might be placing it by interactively entering the order on a B2C site and then clicking submit, or it might involve an organization sending us a document headlessly over the internet, where an XML document comes flying in, encrypted using SSL over HTTPS. Okay, but independent of how the document gets to us, a customer submits us an order. Now, after the application that receives that order receives it, before, for example, we confirm the order, etc., we might want to do a credit check on them. So that application wants to connect to our financial system and do a real-time credit check. That might be a synchronous process, okay, indicated by the dual-headed arrow there. Okay, now after checking the customer's credit and making sure that they haven't surpassed their total credit exposure to us, we might send an order acknowledgement back to the customer. So that might be handled asynchronously. Then we send a message down to the warehouse so that the warehouse can actually queue up the instructions for picking, packing, and shipping that order. After the pick ticket is created and either printed or sent maybe down on a wireless device to that user, and that user moves those goods to the staging location within the warehouse, then we send an instruction to the shipping department so they'll handle shipping it. Now, at that stage, as I mentioned previously, we might have some sort of process that includes an inspector actually inspecting those goods before they're shipped, maybe because these are hazardous materials or something. So some sort of message goes to the inspector, maybe in the form of an email message, and then the user, the inspector, can review that email message, can review the actual goods, review the shipment, inspect those, and then go back to the email message, click on a URL, and then indicate that they've indeed inspected those products. Then the products can be shipped. So a ship confirmation, for example, can go back to the order management system. Then, since we've shipped the goods, we actually have a financial transaction to record, and so the order management system can send a message to the financial system so that we can bill the customer. A message goes back to the customer to tell them that the order is shipping and give them an ETA for arrival of those products, and then the goods actually are sent to the customer. So, this is a pretty simple process, right? But we see even across this fairly simple process, we've got 6 unique roles identified, and we've actually oversimplified this diagram a bit. We've got 6 unique roles identified. Unique roles in this example exist across 2 organizations, but could exist over more than 2 organizations. For example, if we've outsourced the shipping of these products, or maybe even outsourced our warehousing activities. Okay? And we also see that there are a number of different challenges that need to be addressed in order to automate this business process. These roles, of course, might be fulfilled by a number of different applications internally, right? So you may have one app doing your order management, a different app doing your financials, a different app doing your warehousing, and another application still handling your shipping, right? So that compounds the challenge. So if we consider the various challenges that we talked about a moment ago, across this business process, we see the A-to-A challenges represented, for example, in the credit check. So this is where, as I mentioned, the order management application wants to synchronously connect to the financials application to do that real-time credit check. So that might be accessing an object. It might be accessing a COM object or something. Now, the B2B integration points are represented by, for example, us receiving orders from customers over the web, us sending an order acknowledgement to that customer back over the web, maybe over SMTP, and then sending a message to the customer later to give them the ETA for their shipment. Okay, as we talked about, workflow and collaboration also plays a role here, the people-based processes, where in this case we've got the inspector that's inspecting the goods before they're shipped out of the warehouse. Right? And then process automation really just brings it all together. So that's really kind of represented by the whole process defined. Now, the BizTalk orchestration environment is that environment that allows the business analyst to define the overall business process. So this is based on the Visio design surface, and this allows the business analyst to paint the distributed business process within this environment. And then on the right, it allows the more technical personnel to then bind each of the activities in that distributed business process with the implementation for each one of those steps. And we provide various mechanisms for binding those activities to the various steps in the process. Okay. Now, to complement the BizTalk orchestration environment, the business process modeling tool, we all provide a number of BizTalk tools that handle the BizTalk messaging services. So, for example, the BizTalk document editor, the BizTalk mapper, the messaging desk for creating and managing trading partner relationships internally or externally, the BizTalk admin tool, and a document tracking tool for reporting, okay, providing a web-based UI for tracking messages and activities. All right, so these are the distinct tools that we provide as part of the BizTalk Server 2000 product. So just to kind of give you an idea of how the process works, the business analyst, as we mentioned, can model the business process within what we refer to as the BizTalk application designer. Okay, this is what we refer to as the BizTalk orchestration environment. And as a result of modeling this business process, they can then generate the description of that process. And what's generated is actually an XML grammar based on a technology we call XLang, okay, which is short for cross-language, or XLang, X being kind of representing cross. Is really a language that, an XML-based grammar that represents a language used for describing business processes that can cross not only technological boundaries but also organizational boundaries as well. So this XML-based grammar, based in XLang, describes the distributed business process, and then that file can be consumed directly by the BizTalk orchestration engine. Now, this is the engine that actually runs and maintains the running business process over time. So this business process may take seconds or minutes, or it could take weeks or months to unfold. So the BizTalk orchestration engine maintains the state machine for this running business process over time. And it does so based on, once again, the XLang description of that business process that it consumes directly. Okay? Now, as we talked about earlier, each activity in a business process can be bound to the implementation. Now, the bindings include COM. Okay, so a step in a business process, let's say the checking of the credit, might include calling a COM component. Okay, so any activity in a business process can be bound simply directly to a COM component. So if you already have a COM component that does something, then you can utilize that COM component as part of an overall distributed business process by binding one of the activities in the process to that COM component. We can also bind directly to MSMQ. So for a more loosely coupled implementation, we can bind to an MSMQ queue, in which case a message is dropped onto that queue and delivered to some application. Okay, when messages come back, of course, we can read them off of MSMQ queues as well. MSMQ is indirectly as well how we would get to, for example, MQ series. So we do support MQ series directly through an MSMQ to MQ series integrated bridge, which we provide with SNA server for today or host integration server moving forward. We can also bind to web services. This is something that you wouldn't have seen in the UI for the technology preview, and frankly, you wouldn't even see explicitly in the UI for the BizTalk server beta, which was released last week, but we will support this at release. So this is one of the very important DCRs that we're working on. How this will actually appear in the UI is still evolving a bit, but we are going to support the ability to bind to a web service directly within the BizTalk orchestration UI because that's obviously so important for us. So in this case, we're binding to a web service in the context of an internal web service that's being exposed. Now, if we you might say, if we can't get there from here, if we can't access what we need to access through a simple COM connection, through an MSMQ binding, or through a simple web service based on SOAP, for example, then we can use the BizTalk messaging services in order to convert data into a completely different format or possibly use a completely different transport or both. So for example, if I wanted to connect to a Unix-based application internally running on Solaris and I wanted to do it over HTTP, then I could use the BizTalk transformation and routing engine. That's what it does, among other things. I could use those services in order to connect to an application internally over various protocols using various data formats. So for example, this might be a situation whereby I take an XML-based message, I convert it into a flat file, and then I call a KIX transaction on a mainframe, right? Or you might want to take an XML-based file and connect to or convert it to an EDI document and then send it to your EDI system, using SMTP or by just doing a simple file drop. You might just want to drop a file, an EDI file into a file share, whether that's an NTFS file share or maybe a mounted file system based on NFS, and then have your EDI system, sniff that file share to pick up those files and process them through your EDI system. So there are lots of different possibilities here, but the bottom line is we can use the BizTalk messaging services to convert data formats, to use other transport protocols, and to also execute what we call channels, which might include doing various things such as encrypting data or digitally signing the data, etc. Now, we can use those same services just the same to get to applications over the internet. And so I can bind directly to a web service within the BizTalk orchestration environment using the same technology. I can bind to a web service that's being exposed to us externally so that I'm going over the internet to access. And I can use the BizTalk messaging services to access various applications externally that, for example, I'm integrating with across our B2B trading partner community. Okay, so as far as BizTalk messaging is concerned, it all looks the same. And so we can convert a document into a given format and then use HTTP or HTTPS or what have you in order to connect to an application. And conceptually, from a BizTalk standpoint, that endpoint, what we call that port, is going to look about the same. So it creates a very graceful environment within which to define these processes because the applications we're connecting to, really, we don't have to be too concerned about whether those applications are internal or external. Obviously, there are implications for how you need to secure that transmission, etc. But from a business analyst standpoint, it all looks the same. And we expose the capabilities of these services through programmatic access. So you can maintain these systems by accessing the object models directly, through script or otherwise. Okay. So the basic positioning, and hence the primary benefits of BizTalk Server 2000, start with faster time to market. Arguably, this is the most important characteristic of these types of products. In order to be competitive, organizations, as we talked about earlier, must not only integrate their business processes internally, but integrate with partners, but they've got to do it fast. And so BizTalk allows organizations to quickly build, manage, and track distributed business processes that integrate applications internally as well as business partners over the internet. So faster time to market, faster than existing available solutions is a key selling point here. Number two, secure, reliable B2B trading. BizTalk allows you to easily leverage XML and Windows 2000 services in order to define and support trading partner relationships very easily. And so we not only can take advantage of the services in the platform, but we can use XML as a tool as well. And for example, if you wish, use BizTalk Framework as that framework tool in order to implement secure, reliable B2B trading relationships over the internet. The third point is to simply lower your integration costs. As we started with really today, integration has always been too hard and too expensive. And so BizTalk allows you to leverage open standards and specifications in order to integrate disparate applications and services within and between organizations. And so what we'll find is a major selling point will be simply the cost effectiveness of this solution compared to what's out there. Most of the solutions in this space, brace yourself, most of the solutions in this space today start at $250,000 or more. Crossworld starts at $500K. WebMethods starts at $200,000 or $300K. Even IBM MQ Integrator, one of the lower priced products in this space, starts at $55K per CPU. This stuff is not cheap. It's incredibly expensive. So we're going to be an incredibly cost-effective product in this space. Very, very competitive. But conveniently, we're also going to be able to charge real money for it. So you will see us charging real money for this software on a per CPU basis. We should have pricing available for you by the end of September or so. So stay tuned on that. So anyway, that's the basic position of BizTalk Server. Some basic resources you can access for more information is that when customers ask about BizTalk Server, the main place to send them to is indicated here on the slide, Microsoft.com/BizTalk Server. The primary internal site is Developer Web. So if you go to Developer Web, in the left pane, you click on BizTalk Server, and then you click on the product information link. You'll see things like case studies, white papers, demos, and things like that. So there are pointers to a lot of those types of internal resources at that site. Lots of good information there, and that's the best place to get started learning about BizTalk. The primary internal site for more techie stuff like specs and overviews of what some of the EAP customers are doing with BizTalk in production and stuff like that can be accessed at HTTP BizTalk. The best place as kind of your standard place to go for BizTalk demos, just like other demos for that matter, is Demos R Us. There are a couple of good live demos that are up there. The recent J.D. Edwards, McCall, and wireless demo that you may have seen in many venues. I've done that demo in a number of different locations now, so you may have seen that. And a number of other people across the BizTalk virtual team have done that demo as well. So it's a very popular demo these days. You can access that at Demos RS on the main page. There are also pointers to some shockwave animations that talk about how BizTalk works. And those are, frankly, very effective at communicating what BizTalk does. It's a great way to introduce customers to the BizTalk concept, is to take them through some of those shockwave animations that describe integration using BizTalk. And a couple of decent BizTalk sessions that are online or on FinWeb that were done at the Finance College breakfast series sessions. But to be frank, what we've just covered as part of this session really is somewhat equal to what you've seen there. So if you've actually sat through this whole presentation, then you wouldn't really need to go and review those BTS 101 sessions. But for other people that ask you, they could review one or both of those or review this session. That would be an adequate overview. I want to re-stress that we won't be covering BizTalk basics at MTB. We want to be able to dig right in and go into the more heavy-duty material. And so review of this session, if maybe you're recommending it for someone else, and review of some of the materials listed here on the slide as resources would be a great way to prep for the MTB sessions. We'll be doing a number of BizTalk specific sessions at MTB, as well as sessions covering the integration of BizTalk Server and Commerce Server as our integrated business solution. But we'll also be providing some BizTalk training in the post MTB training, and so that's 3 days worth of training that you may have heard about. So I guess that's it. I know I talk fast, so I don't know if it's possible to slow this thing down. But anyway, so hopefully that wasn't too fast for you, but it's a lot of material to cover. If there's anything, can you think of anything I missed off the top of your head, Craig, or should we just go ahead to questions? I'll leave that for you.
Here's some questions. We've seen a lot of UI modifications from the tech preview to beta.
Yes.
Is the UI pretty much set?
Okay, very good question. Should I probably should repeat the questions, right? Okay, the first question was, there were a number of major UI changes from the BizTalk Server technology preview to the BizTalk Server beta. Are you done with the changes or what? So that's kind of the first question. And in general, the answer is yes. There were major changes between the technology preview and the BizTalk beta. And the product that's released at the end of this year or so, we're going to complete. Actually, let me just digress for 2 seconds before I answer that, since I brought up that issue. Or I'll address that next. Let me finish this question first. If we consider the two kind of layers of functionality in BizTalk Server that I mentioned, the BizTalk messaging services and the BizTalk orchestration services, the BizTalk Server technology preview represented the BizTalk messaging services. The BizTalk beta adds in the BizTalk orchestration environment, so the whole environment for business process orchestration, etc. And it also upgraded the BizTalk messaging bits that were originally represented by the technology preview. That did represent a significant UI change, but the UI that you see in the beta is pretty much the UI that you're going to see when the product is released. There might be some minor changes based on feedback. That's basically the UI that you're going to see. We did make a number of terminology changes as well. We changed the word agreement to port. We changed the word pipeline to channel. There were some good reasons for that, and we could talk all day about that, but there won't be any more name changes as well. So to make a short story long, what you see in the beta is, from a terminology standpoint as well as a UI standpoint, very consistent with what you'll see when the product is released. Which brings up the second question that I probably should mention. There has been a number of different statements made regarding the release of the product, and so I want to be clear on this. We certainly hope to finish and ship this product by the end of this year. At this point in time, now this is an internal audience, right? So I want to make this clear. At this point in time, we feel good about doing that. We're on track to do that. The dev team has done a great job of hitting their milestones, and we're code complete at this point. Okay, so we're looking good. But I want to stress that just like Windows 2000 and SQL, we have decided to put the release decision for this product, the RTM decision for this product, in the hands of the customers that are doing live production projects. So we've got an EAP program, which is about 10 companies, and we've got a pre-release program, which is about 30 more companies that are all doing production projects today. So as these customers go into production, we're going to take their feedback, and we're going to use their feedback to make the RTM decision. So, in summary, we hope to RTM this year. We expect to RTM this year. It might not happen. So the expectations I would give customers are that they will have product availability next year. Okay? I mean, officially we're saying first half 01. I hate to say that, but for customers, we feel very, very comfortable with that. Okay, once again, for product availability, not RTM, product availability. Next question.
Do we support clustering in BizTalk Server?
Okay, good question. So the question is, do we support clustering in BizTalk Server? In order to really kind of answer that question specifically, I need to understand from what context you're referring to. But a BizTalk Server implementation includes one or more boxes that are running the actual shared queue for documents that must be processed, that are zinging back and forth between applications, and one or more servers actually doing the work. The servers actually running the BizTalk services. Okay? Now, all of this can naturally exist on one box, in which case, yes, you could cluster that box so that the queues, the actual SQL Server-based queues underlying BizTalk, are clustered using Microsoft Cluster Services. So yes, you can do that. You can cluster the actual SQL Server queue so that if something happens to that database, then the clustered system can pick it up and pick up the ball and run with it. Now, in a more general application, however, of the term cluster, the way that BizTalk Server has been architected is that one or more BizTalk servers running the BizTalk services can access the shared queue. So what you will have is, for example, a shared queue where documents are submitted for processing. And then you could have 1 or 3 or 5 or 10 servers that all pull items off of that queue for processing, representing a cluster, if you will, of servers. Okay? Using a more liberal definition of the word cluster. So by architecting BizTalk Server in this way, and by using a dispatch mechanism, you might say, the pull mechanism instead of a push mechanism, What we have is a number of BizTalk servers that are all participating. They're all acting as a single virtual BizTalk server, pulling items off of the queue for processing as they have worker threads available. Now, because of the way we've architected the various queues and the way that the servers pull items out of the database for processing, what this allows us to do is not only scale the system up very, very gracefully, okay, where I could have, once again, 5 or 10 or 15 servers all acting as a virtual array of BizTalk servers pulling items off of the queue for processing, but it also allows us to gracefully address the fault tolerance issue. So if server number 7 in the array dies, then another server in the array will pick up the items off of the queue after they time out. Okay, so the answer, I guess, is yes in both respects. We can, connect a whole bunch of systems together into a federation, what we might call a BizTalk server federation, in order to scale up to, to many documents per second, up to 300 or 400 or 500 documents per second or higher, depending on how many servers you want to add. But you can also literally cluster the actual shared queue database, the actual shared queue box or boxes using Microsoft Cluster Services.
How about any .NET web services being offered?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So how are we going to support, or how will we kind of represent BizTalk Server as a .NET server? Most likely we will, and obviously this evolves quickly, but most likely we will indeed refer to BizTalk Server as a .NET server, just like SQL 2000 is discussing SQL in the context of the first .NET Enterprise server being released. Tangibly, the way that BizTalk will support web services, in order to really describe this in a more tangible way instead of just referring to it in kind of the .NET visionary way, BizTalk Server, by supporting BizTalk Framework version 2, which is based on SOAP, okay, we can utilize a SOAP-based foundation for sending messages and documents back and forth to BizTalk Server. So that's one way that we will support the web services technology, you might say. Now, the other way is that within the BizTalk orchestration environment, the plan is, okay, and this work is being done today, but just once again, you'll want to stay tuned in order to observe the exact implementation. Within the BizTalk orchestration environment, you'll be able to bind directly to a web service. Okay, so by binding directly to a web service, you can connect an activity to the implementation for that activity by calling that web service using a SOAP-specific message. And so those are the two ways the BizTalk server will specifically support web services. And therefore, those are the things we're going to talk about when we talk about BizTalk being able to support the .NET effort.
And will Visio be required for BizTalk, or will it be a runtime version of it for the orchestration application?
Okay, so the question is, will Visio be required for BizTalk? The answer is yes for development. The BizTalk orchestration environment, the environment within which business analysts would actually define and define and manage distributed business processes, is based on the Visio design surface. And so so BizTalk Server 2000 at release will come with Visio. Visio will be in the box. Now with the beta, it's not in the box. It's not part of the setup with the beta. So just be warned that if you want to install BizTalk Server 2000 off of an internal share or something, make sure you install Visio Standard 1A in English. I want to be specific. Visio Standard 1A in English. For the beta, please only use that version. But at runtime, you will not need Visio. Visio has no runtime implication. So in order to define business processes, in order to use BizTalk in development environment, yes, Visio will be there. It will be part of the box as part of the install. But when they deploy BizTalk-based applications to server farms, Visio does not need to be on those target boxes.
And what other preparation should be done in anticipation of the MTB training session? What they mean, the post-training, the BizTalk post-training.
Okay. Yeah, good question. So the question was, what else should be done in preparation? Yeah, so what work is most appropriate for getting the most out of the MTB post-training on September 19th through 21st? Is that correct? Okay. A couple things. One is that you can access some of the resources that I mentioned on the resources slide. And so there are a number of very good resources here. Acquaint yourself, for example, with some of I would read a few of the white papers that are both accessible on Developer Web. There's two primary white papers. I would also go and check out some of the demos, because those give effective business context for really where BizTalk fits, etc. Beyond that, if you have installed BizTalk Server, frankly, I would go through the tutorial. The actual hands-on lab at MTB will simply be the BizTalk Server set up with the tutorial ready to go. There's an online tutorial. It comes with the documentation of BizTalk Server 2000 that's quite good, and it walks you through step by step using various parts of the product. And so you could either do that before you arrive at MTB, you could do that at MTB within one of the hands-on labs, but doing that would allow you to really push the product in the post-training. So inevitably there is a little bit of overlap. I mean, the post-training will cover some of the things that are covered in the tutorial, but if you spend the time to go through the tutorial, you will be more than ready to address the post-training and really get the most out of it.
One last question. Are DTDs dead for BizTalk?
Are DTDs dead for BizTalk? Well, I would say DTDs are dead in general moving forward. DTDs, as most of you know, listening to this, it has been the historic, traditional way for describing a valid XML document. But DTDs had severe limitations. DTDs had a number of limitations that really prevented XML being effectively used to move data back and forth between applications. For example, DTD did not support data types. You've got to have that. DTD did not support namespaces. So how do you prevent collisions between various XML tags defined as parts of different grammars? DTDs were not flexible. It wasn't an extensible-based model. And so moving forward, the XML schema effort started within the W3C in order to overcome these limitations. And so BizTalk Server allows you to import a DTD for a given document and then save it out using XML schema technology. The XML schema syntax we use in version 1 is XML data reduced, XDR. But in the longer term, we absolutely will be supporting XSD, which is the emerging standard coming out of the W3C. Unfortunately, XSD is not a recommendation yet, the actual XML schema work. It's not a recommendation yet. We hope and expect it will be by the end of this year or early next year. And as soon as it becomes a recommendation, we will do the work required in order to support it within BizTalk Server. Okay, that sufficient, you think? Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, I guess thanks a lot for your time. Sorry for talking so fast, but you're all smart people, so I'm sure you could listen as fast as I talked. So.
Right. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for your time. Yeah. Okay. So out of here. See you guys later.
Thank you very much.
And could you send me the link to this when you finish it?